Hello and welcome to ETCIO Innovation Masters. We bring to you this series in association with Control-S and Cloud4C to recognize IT leaders who have been driving digital innovation and business transformation within their organizations. Today, we have with us K Ananth Krishnan, who's the CTO at India's largest software exporter, TCS. Welcome, Ananth.
Thank you, Varun. Great to be here.
Anand, in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of companies getting disrupted, and TCS has actually played a big role in supporting those companies. But when it comes to TCS itself, you had a large workforce. You still have a large workforce to take care of. What were some of the biggest challenges that you really had to deal with in terms of managing operations in remote scenarios?
So, Varun, this takes me back, to that crazy fortnight that we had in early March, mid-March 2020. And as you rightly said, we had to essentially move almost everybody in TCS to work from home in a safe way personally, as well as in a secure way from the work that we do for ourselves, for our customers and our stakeholders. So we call that entire process the creation of what we now acronymize as SBWS, Secure Borderless Workspaces. And it's a combination of technologies. So about 17 different types of technology combinations to support remote work. Security being one of the key drivers, but also the methodologies, the work processes, the redundancies required, the network support required, and of course, in some cases, moving physical equipment into people's homes. That was, I think, the biggest driver, designing it, delivering it, operating it over the last 18 months, and perhaps into the foreseeable future is become a part of our life now. I think that's the single biggest innovation that I can point to in terms of that transition.
Anand, you worked with one of the greatest pioneers of IT in the industry, Mr. F.C. Kohli himself, and you've also been through many disruptions in IT over the years. What have been some of the biggest positive outlooks that have come out of this pandemic and this disruption that you've seen?
Varun, reflecting, I think it's the triumph of the human spirit that I would just call out. I mean, it's not a very techie thing to say, but I think that is what just absolutely amazes me. How did all of us just pull together, and just make things happen for ourselves? Of course, immediate concerns were about your own health, your family, your neighbors, your people around you, society at large, and customers and other stakeholders. So, that was extraordinarily brilliantly done at every level, individuals, teams, and others. And from the tech perspective, I think the way in which technology came together in tackling the pandemic itself, forget about running life and business and so on, which happened, but how does one ensure that technology is ensuring for the people who have to come and do physical things in an office situation or elsewhere? How do you ensure safety? How do you ensure things like what we did in India, for example, the whole Arogya Setu app? Those were extraordinary pieces of technology built very collectively, very rapidly. Many companies, including TCS, contributed. The government was involved, many voluntary agencies, and so on. That is one part of the story. Then came the industrial part of it, which is things like, all right, how do we completely build new tech to model the future? Right? I mean, simulation and modeling in a company is, the strategy guys would do it, or somebody would, and people would generally not bother. But now operations has to now take a decision to say, should I open this office or not? Should I have 50 people coming in, or 500 people coming in, or 5,000 people coming in? What does it do with the pandemic outside, and what are the vaccination rules and so on? How does one ensure safety in the office, in addition to, of course, work productivity and so on? So all of these factors are, while they're internal, they need enormous amount of technology to make it happen. We have created, for example, a digital twin. It came from my labs to first in industrial context, then in process context, and all of that. Digital twin technology now can twin an entire city. So we can do city-wise modeling of what should we do in a pandemic situation if it's going up, going down. Now, as you can imagine, right now with another potential wave building up, we are busy at work running all those scenarios and seeing how does one do this and so on. So the role of tech in just supporting that spirit that I said, the individual spirit, I think that's the first thing that I would call out. But then tech is supporting this in every aspect. And then on the business side, of course, there are enough and more stories of cloud, about resilience, and all those things.
Absolutely. And in fact, you talked about the digital twin, a concept which we typically hear only from manufacturing companies, and that too very few of them. How did the idea of deploying digital twin come into IT services? How did you come about that idea?
So you're right. This originated in the industrial context, and equipment manufacturers used to typically focus on creating a twin of whichever complex piece of equipment they would have and use it for training, for simulation, for various purposes like that. And even a decade ago, we were working with twins from both the OEMs and TCS itself, what we call the InTwin product today, originated in our lab, the TRDDC lab in Pune, and it was deployed in many countries, as first in power plants and then in many other types of manufacturing plants. So that concept is a decade plus old. About 2 years ago, we actually reinvented that in the context of not industrial, but any process which is involving people, interactions amongst people, that is processes. And thirdly, in terms of data that is available inside any kind of enterprise. It could be retail data, it could be telecom data, it could be banking data, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the TCS Research Lab created this capability, which is allowing many other things, not just industrial equipment, to be twinned. So that was very powerful, and we launched it as TwinX, which is a play on InTwin, the industrial twin. The TwinX product was launched in 2018 or 19, I forget, and it was already twinning customers in a telco. So if a telco wants to project what will their customers do, will they buy this kind of offer, or if they launch some plan like this, will they do it? They could actually run it against a twin of their entire customer base and test those hypotheses before the product itself is launched. They could launch or test processes inside the company and reduce fraud and churn, which is a big problem for telcos. So that was the product which was launched. This was taken in the context of what I described for COVID-19, and the city twin, the building twin, and so on became offshoots of it. Because why? Because we can model a process, which is work. We can model people who happen to be now employees or citizens of a city. And we could now model the interactions against a set of rules. Right? So you could now say that this street let us say, the city of Pune has a preponderance of residential complexes of a certain, let's say, middle class or upper class or lower class or whatever. And you could then attribute that behavior to that population. And then say that if people have to travel from there to an office, what is a propensity for them to be infected without knowing it, and so on. So you overlay the whole SEIR pandemic modeling on top of it. So these kinds of things happen at rapid pace. That's that is what, again, is an amazing thing, because when you said that what the last year and a half, boy, it's been only a year and a half, is it, of the pandemic? This looks like it's been going on forever, right? So the speed at which some of these just happened is quite amazing, and the scale at which they just happened.
Absolutely. I mean, at least this gave you an opportunity to test out a technology in a very different context, and I'm sure with that you'll be able to help out a lot more customers going forward. Other than digital twin, any other innovation that you'd like to talk about that you kind of tested out during the last couple of years? So, the way in which I'll answer that, Varun, is to use a little bit of a mental framework that I learned from
You mentioned Mr. F.C. Kohli, and my other academic mentor was Clayton Christensen. I learned a lot from him as well in the way in which he thought about innovation. So Clay's model of innovation was all about not the actual innovation, but what would that do for the jobs that customers hire you for. A customer could be an external customer could be somebody inside the company as well. So if you look at it from that perspective, the most common type of innovation, which is let me call it the expected or the incremental innovation, is in things like digital, in terms of cloud, in terms of cybersecurity, and in just getting things right. Data should be right, and so on. So there's a lot of good innovation which is sprung through and really accelerated in all these: cloud, data, cybersecurity, and so on, which is zero trust, for example. It was there before the pandemic. Now, because your envelope of risk for a company is literally a unit of one, because every employee sitting at home is at risk, right? So you now need to think about zero trust in a much more significant way. So that has accelerated. All of the principles of data. We built this data maturity model, which we call DATOM. We used to assess companies against the data maturity model. Most companies were somewhere on a 5-point scale of around 2. What we have seen is that there is actually now a conscious shift to improve data capability in every organization. So we're seeing more and more people using the DATOM assessment to try and see whether they can move to 3, from 3 to 4, and so on, so that they recognize that this is. So this is on the core innovations. The next big story is about AI. AI has been there, and AI on the consumer side, there's enough and more which has been said. But AI in the enterprise, we call it out as machine first. So if there's anything that we do inside TCS, the first question that we ask is that give the machine the first right of refusal. Can it be done by an AI automation of some sort? If the answer is yes, then make it happen. Right? Because human capital is just too valuable to be doing something repetitive, which is better done by a machine. So that is where the AI journey started, and it had started even much before the pandemic. But in the pandemic, now this has accelerated even further. Right? So you're familiar with all the products that we have in the market, ETCIO and so on. They have done extremely well in the customer context, but all that is now getting deployed inside the organization. We talked about Twins. Twins was outside. Now Twins are now embedded into the internal context of everything that we do as well. So just to extrapolate that, let me call this class as AI-driven enterprise. Look at every process of the company: sales process, people process, delivery process, etc., and ask that machine first question: can it be done by a machine? If the answer is yes, just do it. And the AI world has seen. December a year ago was when the OpenAI Foundation demoed the famous GPT-3 demo, where AI wrote code, right? And we've been playing around with it since then, and not just us, but I'm sure universities and researchers worldwide are playing around with it. It's still very nascent, but it's an example of what AI could do even in our space. Looking at the future, I think the big stories, like we have announced our net zero roadmap as a company. Right? We will be net zero by 2030. We have significant milestones. 2025 is a big milestone, and so on and so forth. Technology is going to play a huge role in TCS's net zero journey. Our task is perhaps not as complex as many other industries. So what we learn internally, what my labs are building for TCS itself, the energy management, the water management, all of that, we're also building it out as products, services for the outside world. Right? And there's so many new challenges that we are hitting that this whole sustainability journey is going to be massive. You know that I run a co-innovation network, academic institutions, startups, and so on. That ecosystem way of thinking itself is a business innovation for us. Now, how do I bring that to bear from the market perspective? How do I make, when there are 50 companies on a cloud platform, how do they leverage the fact that they're all on the same platform? Can we create an ecosystem across them? It's much easier than everybody being on their own systems. So those are the two bets that we're looking at for the future. Sustainability is one example, and ecosystems as the business innovation example.
From the AI perspective, you talked about AI being the future. Just one quick comment on the developments in terms of regulations in India. We are talking about controlling the amount of data an organization has, even in terms of aggregate data. Will that have a major impact on the future of AI projects in the country?
See, there are, that process, you're right, is ongoing, and we are also contributing. It's in public consultation. A lot of, I think, things have been tabled in Parliament as well. The JPC inputs have been taken. We participated quite significantly in all of that. So that process is running. So the expectations are that there will be a need for data for things like AI, for sure. But given that many newer techniques of AI are emerging today, which actually are going to be very different from the way in which we have traditionally, it's wrong to say traditionally, I mean, machine learning is itself, probably 20 years old, but it sounds like it's always been around. Having massive amounts of data to train an AI engine is mainstream today. Perhaps it will still be very significant going into the future, but it will not be the only way to build AI systems. Right. So while the data issue is going to be a major one for the foreseeable future, already there are approaches which say that you could potentially train an artificial intelligence with much less data. I mean, just like, for example, a human baby, when it sees a cat, it doesn't see 10 million cats. It sees a cat, and perhaps there is a little bit of a single shot learning there, and there's a bit of reinforcement when the mother or the father says meow, meow, or whatever. And that's it. I mean, you know what a cat looks like. And then you don't need to be shown 20 million cats to train you to see what is a cat. I mean, once you know this is a cat, there's a cat. This is a dog, this is a dog. So that is very difficult for a machine to do today, but there are already algorithms which are pushing that boundary.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us, Ananth. It was lovely chatting with you.
Pleasure.